Spending time with people my age who had just lost loved ones that were murdered in a school due to gun violence changed my whole life.
Maxwell Frost made history as the first Gen Z member elected to Congress. But long before the Capitol, he helped build one of the largest youth-led movements this country has ever seen.
And I got to the point where I said, you know what, to change the politics, we need to change the politicians.
From gun violence to the housing crisis to racism, Congressman Frost confronts the challenges defining a generation.
I try to be in the moment with people. There's real pain in this country, and we're in this place where the wealthiest among us own the most, and they want us to blame each other.
Joined by his dad and biggest cheerleader, Patrick Frost.
If you tell Max he can't do it, you're just putting fuel on the fire.
Join hosts Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, Marc Kielburger, and Craig Kielburger for an unfiltered conversation with Congressman Maxwell Frost about courage, compassion, and creating change.
It ended up being one of the biggest stories about me to this day. I mean, I'll be walking around a street of a random city and somebody will come up to me like, honey, did you...
Welcome to My Legacy. Today's guest is Congressman Maxwell Frost. His journey from organizing to the halls of Congress was inspired by family, faith, and the fight against injustice. Congressman Frost, we're thrilled to have you with us here today. And as you know, at My Legacy, we don't only invite extraordinary individuals, we ask them to invite someone who knows them incredibly well. Would you do us the honor of introducing us to your plus one today?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. So today I have none other than my dad, Patrick Frost, who is, one of the biggest reasons I'm a congressman today. Ever since I was literally born, there's always been music in the house. And a lot of people don't know this, but I'm a musician. My whole life, I've really been a drummer. And my dad has a love of both music and politics that I have today. And so some of my most fond memories are getting to perform with him all around Orlando, learning about what music is, but not just on a page, but on a deeper level as well. And, something I always talk about is the fact that my dad invited me to be vulnerable with him as we listened to music throughout my life, which I know, especially as a young man, is something that maybe I took for granted growing up. But as I speak with a lot of people my age and older, I find out that I'm one of the luckiest people in the world to have grown up with someone who invited me to be vulnerable, to put my heart on a table through the arts. And so I'm here with my dad, Patrick Frost.
I love that. That is awesome. As a dad myself, my heart's kind of like, swelling a little bit hearing that one.
Exactly. And we've had so many different combinations on the show, but I believe this is our first father-son combination.
Yes,
so this
correct.
It's very exciting to have you all both on with us today. And also we're very excited because for our family, March for Our Lives is, something that's so close and dear to our heart from our daughter speaking. We've worked with you all. We've seen you all in so many iterations over the years. So it really feels like being with family today. And Congressman Frost, one of the beautiful things that you speak about is your multicultural background. So not only are you the first Gen Z congressman elected, but I believe you're also the first Afro-Cuban elected to Congress. And you talk about how your parents were open with you from the beginning about being adopted at birth. How did that shape your sense of identity growing up?
Interesting because my parents were always open with me about it. Now, to be honest, as you can see, I think we kind of knew too, from a young age. And but my dad and my mom always offer to give me more information, stuff like that. And to be honest, and Dad, I'm not sure if you remember too, like when I was growing up in church, there was a group of like adoptees that I would. It wasn't like a support group, but it was like a Sunday school kind of thing. And I always felt like the odd man out because, I was adopted at birth and I never really had this want to find out more, if that makes sense. And it didn't come from like a negative place. I didn't really care. Like I have my mom and my dad, my sister, this is my life. And so I never really, looked for more information. It really wasn't until I was thinking about running for Congress that I went to my dad and my mom and asked them for some more information. To be honest, up until a few years ago, I've been saying that it's because I wanted to dig into my past to feel inspired. But the real reason is because somebody who has helped mentor me at different points said, Max, you need to look in your past and see what's in there before you run for office. Like, you got to do some research. And so I spoke with my dad and mom about it. But, part of the thing is my mom came here from Cuba in the late 1960s. My dad he'll talk more about it. Like, he is a steel pan player, but also multi-instrumentalist. He's a composer, very deeply and classically musically trained and in jazz and in everything, really. And so I grew up in this multicultural house from the music that I heard, from like soca blasting in the living room studio, which God bless my mom for letting my dad have his studio in the living room.
And for letting you have a drum set as a child.
And then for letting me become a drummer. And even the people my dad would bring over, his friends, right, from all around the world, playing many different types of music to my mom. And my mom having, her grandma, her mom, my grandma, Yaya, who passed away a few years ago, but she only spoke Spanish. And so that's kind of like one of the main reasons I would speak Spanish in the house was to communicate with my grandma. Growing up, every summer we'd go to Miami. And it was just a normal thing. I feel like I partially grew up in Miami just because we spent our summers there. But, it's interesting because I represent one of the most diverse districts in Congress by far. And I feel like I grew up like that as well, in the household, but also in the school I went to as well.
Patrick, you've said Maxwell has been precocious and driven since he was a toddler. Can you share a story from his childhood that gives a glimpse into what a young Maxwell was like?
If I could just add, though, as a dad, Patrick, I actually have to say, I love how you were smiling so glowing like a light bulb as the question was even being asked.
The person that you see here is the same little guy that was my son. Always has a plan, and he's always producing. He's always creating a show, or selling something. I told him one time when he was probably in junior high school, I said, you could go across the street to the car dealership and make more money than I do as a performer. At your age right now, you could go over there and this is the funny thing. When he turned about, I think maybe 18.
Yeah, 18, yeah.
He did that. He went across the street and got a job as a car salesman.
Wow.
And he said he was doing very good. And here's what is and I hope I can tell you. They brought him into a meeting with the other car salesmen, and they said, we want to teach you how to basically get people in debt and get them to spend more money than they should spend because we want to sell cars. And so we're going to teach you how to get people to make a mistake in their finances and overbuy. And Max got up and walked out and he came home early from work. And I said, what are you doing? Why aren't you at work? Why did you come home? And he goes, I quit. And I said, why did you quit? He goes, because they wanted to teach me how to cheat people. That's really the truth. Wow. And he said he wouldn't do it. He said, I'm not going to do that. So he just quit his job and walked out. He didn't give him 2 weeks notice. He just walked out the door.
Well, I love that. It speaks to your heart. I love it. I also, by the way, I love the honesty of Patrick. You turning, like, is it okay if I share this story? This is what we love, this conversation, because it gets those great stories that often you don't hear before.
Congressman, let me ask one question. When you look back over your childhood and the fact that you were always engaged with music with your dad, what did those years of music together actually teach you about life? And how do you apply any of that to what your job is today?
Honestly, I brought this up at the beginning a little bit, but one of the things people tell me a lot after interviews or town halls or this and that is, I appreciate how candid you are, and I appreciate your vulnerability. You're willing to talk about mistakes or like deep feelings you have that maybe people aren't used to politicians kind of just saying. And I really do attribute that to my dad, and I really do attribute that I actually to sitting in the studio, sitting in the car, listening to music, and being invited to feel, being invited to express how I feel. And I remember the first time, I think it's the first time, if not one of the first times I ever cried to music. And we were sitting in the studio, and I think I was like around like 7, 8, 9 or something like that. And it was The Swan that you played for me, which is a solo or really a duo with a piano, but it's a cello piece. And I just remember as a young kid sitting there crying. I think we cried together at that song. And like, you don't think much of it when you're a kid. You wipe your tears, you just continue to go on. But we had a lot of moments like that, listening to music together, going to concerts together, performing together. Like if you go on YouTube and you go deep, you're gonna find a bunch of videos of my dad and I performing together. Usually me auditioning for some jazz program, and my dad's on piano or whatever, and growing that. But for me, learning, like, being a musician, being invited to be vulnerable, and then being okay with putting it out there in front of my dad, and then putting it out there in front of an audience, is something I'll, have with me the rest of my life. In second grade, my dad got me a drum set, which was important, but there's actually the most important thing that he got me, even more important than the drum set, was the private lessons that came with the drum set. But I always felt like in school, at least, I had something that a lot of other people didn't have. I had an understanding of the music, not just because I'm better than everyone, but because of my dad, taught me how to listen to music. And I felt, and that's what I'm trying to say. He taught me how to listen to music. And, my band instructor in middle school, Russ Weaver, it was very common for him to come in the band class, sixth grade, right? This is called beginner's band. Most people in there have never really played an instrument, but they showed proficiency in, music skills generally. But I came in since the second grade playing music and having a musician dad. And something, Mr. Weaver would always do is he would play a song at the top of the hour and just have us sit in silence and listen to it. And that's very hard for sixth graders to do. And I honestly wasn't the most well-behaved kid in the sixth grade. But when he'd play the song, I would sit there and my eyes and listen, and to a degree where, like, I'd have friends in the percussion section, which, if you know anything about band, everyone has to sit in their seat, but the percussionists are kind of walking around the back, being, we have a little bit more freedom, so we're usually making jokes and stuff. My friends would always be like, "Why are you so silent? Like, you're always so loud and telling jokes and stuff." But I felt like I knew how to really listen to the music because of my dad. And so I don't know, that's something that really means a lot to me. And I still play to this day. So when I go to events, "Congressman, there's a drum set here. Why don't you play it?" And so I play a lot or when I go to churches, I don't even get asked. The bishop will be like, "There's the drum set, Congressman, like, get on it."
So for all of our listeners, you should, if you have a moment, go down the rabbit hole and find young Congressman Frost.
Oh yeah.
And find some of his old videos, and then let's do a contest who can find the oldest one.
Oh, post in the comment section.
Now, Patrick, because I'm a big believer that our children are our greatest teachers in so many capacities. And I know that you've talked about many things that you've learned from your son. In particular, you said that raising Max, as you called him, opened your eyes to the discrimination that many minorities face. Is there one particular story that you would like to share with us and our audience that still sticks with you?
Yeah. Max was probably maybe 13 or 14, maybe 15 years old. And it was a Saturday afternoon, and he had gone to the Loop, which is a shopping center near us, probably with some friends. And he was gone for most of the morning and part of the afternoon, and he came home. And he said, "Dad, strangest thing happened. I was in Sports Authority, and I was just walking around looking at stuff, and I noticed this man. Every time I turned a corner, there was this man was here, and he was watching me. And when I was in college at University of Miami, I got into retail security. I was a store detective at a department store at the Midway Mall, and I learned about store security. So when he started describing this man, he kept showing up wherever Max turned an aisle, and there was this guy. I knew what it was. It was a store detective, and Max. And I said to Max, "Max, that was a store security guard. He was watching you because he thought you were going to steal." And Max said to me, why would he think I was going to steal? And I remember putting my head down because we'd never had this kind of conversation. And I said, "Max, it's most likely because of because of the color of your skin. That is the most likely reason that he chose to follow you instead of somebody else. And I remembered how tough it was for me to tell him that. And I kind of remember looking at him, and he looked confused. And that is the one that sticks with me more than any. And is trying to explain that to him. And I didn't understand it because it never happened to me that way. You know, I never went to my mother and father when I was in junior high school or early high school and said somebody was following me at the Woolco store down at the shopping center. That never happened. It's an experience I didn't have. And so I was trying to teach Max, but I was also learning myself that this is not fake. This really happens to people of color. Do you remember that, Max?
Yeah. I remember that.
And then what did that moment also, did it change you and even in your parenting or even just seeing the world, like when you would see other young Black men out in the world, did it in any way or even like with other Black parents, did it in any way impact you in that way as well?
You know, my mother and father, they're both gone now. When Max was born, you see, Max's birth mother couldn't positively identify who the father was. So when Max was born, we didn't realize he was going to be mixed race. And I remember calling my mother, and I think that my mother thought this whole idea of us adopting a baby from this woman at birth was something that we weren't going to go through with. It was almost I think that she thought we were just kidding around. And I remember calling her. She was in probably Ohio still. Yeah. And I said, Mom, our son was born. We have a son. His name is Maxwell. And I remember somehow or another she just got a photograph we probably sent. I can't remember how we transmitted back in 1997, but we sent her a picture of some kind, and
probably fast.
It was kind of quiet, you know. There was not a celebratory thing happening. And what I want to try and say is this: having Max in our family taught my mother and father that they have to escape what they grew up with. As you know, both of them were raised on farms in the out in the country, and they brought their, you know, I mean, it was an age of racism. It was normal. It was normal. They were good people, but they had that component in them, and Max exorcised that component in them and gave them, you know, they went to heaven with the peace that they managed that racism, you know, because of Max. You can't not love this kid, you know. You can't not love this kid.
All of America, we love him.
Oh my God, Patrick, I was tearing up because it is true and it is the reality of our world. And I appreciate the honesty and I just appreciate the vulnerability. Like clearly you model this for your son. Like we understand where your son comes from. And Congressman Frost, so 15 years old, you have this pivotal moment as an activist when you're at a vigil in DC and you meet family members who lost children in the Sandy Hook massacre. Can you share with us those conversations that were so pivotal for your life and how those impact you even today?
Well, you know, Sandy Hook happened right before I was getting ready to perform at a jazz band concert in school. We were there at a Chili's or something eating, and this silence falls across the whole restaurant, like a palpable silence. And everyone's looking at each other like, what's going on? And we see that everyone's staring at the TVs at the bar. And we look at the TV screens and we see the news. Somebody walked into this elementary school and murdered all these children and teachers at Sandy Hook. And we all kind of went to the concert with this eerie feeling, but I had an intense amount of anxiety. I played one of the worst shows I've ever played in my life because, you know, where I was drumming, the stage door is right behind me, and I kept looking over at the stage door, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I actually, well, this is something my dad and I share. We both have kind of obsessive personalities, and so if something gets in our mind, we just keep thinking about it. And I kept thinking about this horrible thing that happened in Sandy Hook. I never heard of Sandy Hook. I don't know what Newtown is. I never heard of any of these places. And I went online and I started seeing on Facebook that, you know, there were some young people speaking out about it. And one of them, her name is Sarah Clements, her teacher, or her mother, Abby, was a teacher at Sandy Hook. She survived the shooting. And I sent a message to Sarah. We became kind of pen pals, and she sent me a form and said, "We're hosting a vigil in like this week of action in DC. If you want to come fill this out." So I filled it out, and I asked my parents, and I filled it out. I didn't know this until about 2 years ago. As a member of Congress, I went and spoke at the vigil I went to when I was 15. And the board members told the story of how they were, doing the manifest for the bus and everything. And then they had this one application from a 15-year-old in Florida that no one had ever heard of. And that was me. And they had a whole board meeting debating, should we allow him to come? He's going to come alone. We don't know who he is. And they decided to let me come, which, is a huge decision in my life that they made, because going there changed my life. And I went alone, but they had chaperones and everything. But spending time with people my age who had just lost loved ones that were murdered in a school due to gun violence changed my whole life. And the vigil was very powerful, but to be honest, it wasn't even just the vigil. It was being with them and like being kids with them. The whole time wasn't completely 5 days of seriousness. We laughed. We were telling jokes. We were bringing kids. We were running around Capitol Hill, delivering letters, inviting people to the vigil. And then taking those first couple days, and then my last day there after the vigil at the hotel, we were staying like a Virginia hotel, like a Days Inn or something, where the pool's like in the basement. And we're all in this basement pool, wading our feet in the water, and everyone just starts opening up about their sibling that they lost. And I just kind of sat there and listened to everybody. And I remember after that, I like ran to my hotel room. I called my mom. I was crying. I was like, "Mom, this was my experience." And then I ended up coming home and started organizing. I started like organizing on gun violence prevention locally. I'd go to my school board meetings. I became obsessed with figuring out how to use student government in schools to like advocate for policies instead of it just being planning the homecoming. And so I ran for student government president and got elected there. And so then we started doing like real political advocacy in the student government. And then I organized all the student governments in my school district to do a countywide thing where we'd all come together, once a quarter. And it's just like that trip really did change my life. But it wasn't just what we did on that trip, but it was meeting those people my age who were going through a sense of grief and loss that I've never experienced in my life. Gun violence wasn't part of my day-to-day life, And so I think it's part of the reason why seeing those images on the screen jarred me so much. And it really put things into perspective for me. And the good thing is the foundation was always there, because like I mentioned before, my dad's, very musical, obviously, but he's also very political. And they'll take this the wrong way, but I'd grow up listening to my dad yell at the news. But I would listen. I wasn't just saying, "Oh, there's dad yell at the news." I would sit there and listen, and he would talk to me about stuff, to the point where I'd try to go to school, elementary school, and debate with people. I don't know what the heck I was talking about, but there was a foundation there that my dad laid right on politics, that I knew, like, these are where my values lie. But I had to kind of, you have to figure that out for yourself, what you believe, and that was one of the first moments outside of the home and outside of my community that I started to figure out what I believe in.
Congressman Frost, you recently joined, speaking of going out into community, Senator Chris Murphy for town halls all across the country. And many were in, or not many, I think they all were in Republican districts. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you actually were stepping into rooms where you knew that many disagreed with you. What have you learned about how to listen and talk across disagreements on that tour?
Yeah, and connecting all this together, one of the first politicians I ever met was Senator Chris Murphy when I was 15 years old at that vigil. And so it's just, full circle to be on the road with him now. Mm-hmm. And we also introduced the Office of Gun Violence Prevention bill together now about 3 years ago, which, President Biden enacted through executive order. Trump got rid of it on day 2. When I used to work for candidates as an organizer, I was always, there was things I took that inspired me, but I also kept the mental list of things I would never do if I was ever in that position. Mm-hmm. And something you learn from knocking doors, which is all I did, right? At fresh 18, after I did my 3 month stint at the dealership, and then I started working on campaigns, knocking doors solely. You learn how to be a listener because for a few reasons. It's a tactical thing because when you're at a door and you're talking to people and you talk too long and you start seeing them, they start looking around, they get a little antsy, they're trying to move on with their life. But I need to tell you about the candidate. I need to tell you about this person who wants to fight for you that I believe in, and I want to make sure you go vote. And so what you do is you put it back on them. You ask them a question, and that opportunity for them to speak, the longer they speak, the longer you get to have that, conversation with them, that experience with them. And so you want the other person to speak a lot. And I found that, a lot of times, especially politicians, you have these town halls that aren't really town halls, right? There's questions that have already been predetermined. And I try to replicate being at the door with somebody as much as I can in everything. As part of what I tell my team when we're coming up with our messaging. Will this sentence get the door slammed in my face or leave the door open, right? At the town halls when I'm traveling with Chris or with Senator Murphy, how are we, we're going to give someone the mic. We're going to let them say whatever they want to say, right? And we're going to really listen to them. And I don't know, I just feel like I've learned the power of listening so much by knocking doors and how important it is to be an active listener and then give a real answer to people. Because that's what, we hear it all the time. Politicians, they give non-answers. And to connect this to our conversation from before, I think part of it is where politicians are usually risk adverse. And, the more vulnerable you are and the more real you are, the more you might say something that maybe 5 years or 10 years down the line when you run for higher office, it won't be advantageous to you. And I just don't really even think about that kind of stuff. I try to be in the moment with people. There's real pain in this country. The wealth inequality has gotten worse and worse and worse and worse and worse to the point where people have done everything that you're supposed to do, still can't pay for everything. And we're in this place where the wealthiest among us own the most, and they want us to blame each other, even, down the party line. And I talk about this all the time when I'm in these districts where I say, they want us to hate each other because you're Republican versus Democrat. When at the end of the day, there's these billionaires and mega corporations that have been leaving us crumbs and for generations, really. And we have to look beyond that. And I always bring up that Trump is that too. There's this saying, be ruthless to our systems and give grace to people. And that's the way I always think. I'm always I always go through my emails and everything when my staff is writing. I say, never just say Republicans. I always say Republicans in Congress or Republicans in the White House or this and that, because I'm trying to reach out to people who a lot of folks have been lied to, and a lot of people bought the lie. And, look who I'm talking to. Movement, as we all know, is about addition, not subtraction. And I'm always looking to bring more people into it.
Like, follow, and subscribe to the My Legacy podcast, and most importantly, share this with someone who needs a reminder of their strength today.
At 24, when you first ran for office, it was certainly maybe not glamorous. You were driving Uber and couch surfing, basically just to make ends meet. How did living through those challenges prepare you to represent people facing their own difficult struggles?
It was just kind of the perfect storm that put me in this position. So essentially, there was a rent hike freeze in Florida during the pandemic, which was lifted. The rent, I was living with my partner and my sister at the time, and we were living in a part of town that essentially after the rent hike was taken off, our rent went up like 33%. Now, I had quit my job to run for Congress, so I had some savings, but I didn't have a ton. I thought it would be enough for a year and a half. I quickly learned it wasn't. And for 2 months, we didn't have a place to live. And the thing here is, this was in the height of COVID. At the time, I was talking about my grandma. My 97-year-old grandma was living with my parents. And this is when the Delta variant was going crazy, and I'm out doing campaigns. So going home was not really to stay with my parents was not really an option for me due to COVID and my grandma. And so I ended up emptying all my savings into this Airbnb for a month. And I was like, Future Max will have a solution. Well, a month passed and Future Max did not have a solution. So then for the month after, I just couch surf with friends and different things like that. And I quickly figured out I need an income, and I need to figure that out. So I decided to do Uber because of to be a little bit more flexible, because what I didn't want to do, I was actually going to go, there was a time I also worked at Olive Garden as a server. Because all my friends were working there, and I wanted to join them, and I was actually a really good server. And I was like, let me go back to that. I'll make good tips. But we're on a campaign. You get those calls. Hey, this person wants to interview you in an hour. Can you do it? And what I learned about running a campaign for a year and a half is there's not like a silver bullet. It's the collection of all these good decisions, right, that lead you to winning. And I didn't want to miss one. I didn't want to miss one of them. And I knew that either the job would suffer or the campaign would suffer. And I'm not one of these people that's going to like, I don't want to get a job and then be the person that everyone hates because I'm calling out all the time. That's why I decided to do Uber. But I do think, that those 2 years taught me a lot about the housing crisis in a way that I'd never experienced before. Because believe it or not, I didn't sign my first lease until the pandemic. And the reason why is because I was a campaign organizer. And if anyone's worked a campaign before, you know that you're moving around the country every 8 months or every year, and you're living in people's spare bedroom, right? You're living in supporter housing, right? So I was always living in a spare bedroom of some supporter of the campaign from 18 to 24 or to 23. So it was my first experience going for a lease, seeing the rent increase, having to leave because I couldn't pay the rent, essentially experiencing homelessness during that time, getting into a place saying, if I get elected to Congress, I'll never have to deal with this again. Getting elected to Congress, going to DC, applying to apartments, getting denied every apartment I applied to because my credit was poor, because I wasn't really making an income during the campaign. And this is part of the reason why I'm doing so much and introducing so much legislation on housing, because it's very personal for me going through that experience. In fact, my first housing bill, the End Junk Fees for Renters Act, and my second one that has to do with ending credit score screening, all came from my story. It all came from that story. And in fact, I remember in January when I got sworn in, I'm doing an ABC interview and they're asking me, where are you going to live? And I casually was like, well, I just got denied all the apartments I applied to. I think I'm going to couch surf with a friend for a few weeks and then figure it out. I didn't think it would be a big deal at all. It ended up being one of the biggest stories about me to this day. I mean, I'll be walking around a street of a random city and somebody will come up to me and be like, honey, did you find a place to live? And breaking news, I'm good now. I have an apartment. Everything is okay. But when that news broke and it became incredibly viral that this new congressman couldn't find a place to live in DC, I received over 10,000 letters, emails, phone calls, messages from people around the country telling me their stories of how they experienced similar stuff. So we took those stories and we wrote a bunch of housing legislation on making sure that we eliminate barriers to housing, right? I experienced that as a new congressman. I had the income, right? But what happened is because my credit was poor, these algorithms just deny you and they don't look at the totality of a person. And we know every study shows us that credit scores are not a good indication on whether or not someone's going to pay their rent or not. Why? Well, number one, paying your rent doesn't help your credit score. And number two, when a working person falls on hard times, what are the first two things they always cut from? Food and medicine. What's the last thing they cut from? Rent and mortgage.
Yeah.
It's literally the last thing somebody will touch, even when they're having a hard time. And so it's keeping a bunch of people from having the honor of paying the high rent. And then I have bills to attack the high rent as well. So it all comes from experiencing it, which is part of the reason housing is one of my top priorities right now.
Well, and I think no matter your political beliefs, to all of our listeners and viewers out there, people appreciate the fact that because you have lived that experience, you're able to advocate on that issue, because so many people, to your point, if a member of Congress, for goodness sakes, and that's why it went viral, obviously, is denied a place to stay. You know, how many are struggling? And Patrick, as a father watching all of this unfold for your son, going into debt, experiencing homelessness, driving an Uber just to stay afloat, unsure if he was going to win, running for Congress at this stage of his life, reflecting back on this, was there a particular moment where you felt extraordinary pride or, frankly, extraordinary worry for him?
I want to push back on one thing. From the minute he said he was going to run for Congress, I knew he was going to win.
I knew
there was no doubt.
I felt that. I knew. I knew you were going to say that.
I love the pride of a father.
Yeah.
I love it.
This is 2012. Barack Obama is been reelected, and his inaugural parade is on the event screen. And Max said to me, "Hey, you know, he had a salsa band at the time. He had created a salsa band with his friends. He said, you know, I can submit an audition tape to the inaugural committee, and they could maybe select us, and we could maybe be in the inaugural parade." I said, and I was tired. I came home from work. I said, "Yeah, that's great, Max. Go ahead, go do your thing." And I went to bed. Next week came, and hey, Dad, guess what? We submitted we put together a video, and we submitted it to the inaugural committee in D.C. Maybe they're going to pick us. And I said, "That's great, Max. I'm going to bed." 2 weeks later, I come home from work. He goes, "Dad, you're not going to believe this. I got an email from the inaugural committee. They really liked our video, and they've invited us to be in the inaugural parade." And so then at that point, I set my instruments down that I carried in the house, and I was sitting in his room, and I said, "Max, you can't do that. I've been in the music business my whole life. You're going to need to go to the inaugural parade." I said, they're just inviting you. They're not paying for it.
They don't pay for anything.
And I said, "So now you need 2 Sober Eagle buses with 2 drivers in each bus. I said, bottom line, you're all minors, so you need sponsors, you need chaperones. You need $15,000. You need $15,000, and you need it right now. You're not going to be able to raise it. You're not going to be able to go without that." And Max, quiet.
He said it nicer than this.
and he met with a woman who was a kind of a local politician. She was a mayor of a small town, and she was
Her name is Donna Hart.
Donna Hart. She's a wonderful lady. She was in the school teaching also, and I saw that her and Max had gotten together, and they were fundraising. And to long story short, he raised so much money for this trip that when I went up as a chaperone, of course. I don't remember ever taking my wallet out of my pants. Everything was paid for by the money that him and Donna raised.
We took a few weeks and we put together, a letter, and we hand delivered it to tons of businesses, and we found a ton of support. And I remember, it was you and the principal of my school, and a lot of people were like, "Max, it's great you did this, but like our school is a very underfunded public arts school." And so they were like, we're not sure we can raise the money in a week. We had like a week or something. But Donna, who was a teacher at the school, and she was the former mayor of one of our small towns, was like, "Let's do it." And so her and I went out, and we got every meal donated. We got the buses everything was donated, and we ended up getting our float donated too. And we all went up and performed. We're the first salsa band to ever perform in a presidential inaugural parade.
You have so many firsts already. And you're not even 30.
So I always tell people, if you tell Max he can't do it, you're just putting fuel on the fire. He's gonna prove you that. So when Elon Musk came out and said that he was gonna fund a challenger for Max, I just laughed. I said, "You know what you need to do, Elon Musk? You need to come down to Eatonville and march in the Martin Luther King parade in Eatonville with Maxwell, and see if you think you have enough money to knock him out, because you don't." But you have fun trying. You have fun trying.
Congressman, my father's dream was for freedom, justice, equality, and so many other things that have not happened in our nation yet. How do you see yourself connected to that dream, or I'd say vision, because the vision has not yet been realized, and some might even say we're further away from where we need to be. So as a young leader, as you know, Dad was 27 when he led the Montgomery bus boycott after Miss Parks had been arrested. And so people forget that, by the way.
Yeah.
Because you always think about leadership as being older. I know that your representation inspires so many other young people, and we badly need that leadership in Congress today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And, I think because I come from grassroots organizing and movement work, I'm very clear-eyed about my role right now. And what I mean by that is I've spent most of my advocacy and organizing career sitting in rooms with politicians who would cry with us. I remember this, me and Marco Rubio, we would cry with us and hug us on gun violence prevention, and then the votes were always the same. And I always questioned, are we doing it right? I always questioned myself, are we doing it right? What did we do wrong? And I got to the point where I said, you know what, to change the politics, we need to change the politicians sometimes. And that's why I decided to run for Congress. But I think part of the problem is sometimes we see politicians on a pedestal or as the sole leaders of a movement. And what I'm clear-eyed about is the fact that I'm still an organizer. I just organize in a different place. I organize in Congress. So many people would disparage me during my race. It was distasteful for people to say, my opponents to say he's too young. So no one would say that, but they'd say he's just an organizer. He's just an organizer. He's just an advocate. And when I got to Congress, I would sit in the back of the chamber and just look around. And I encourage people, if you're ever in DC, go sit in the gallery during votes and watch, because what you'll see is a fishbowl of organizing. Everyone talking to each other, trying to convince people, hey, can you sign on my bill for my constituents? Can you come to this press conference? It's important to me. It's important for my people. Everyone's organizing. I say, I so believe that we need more organizers in office, especially in representative government, and where you're serving as a part of a body. I always tell people, I'm not a chief executive. I'm not a mayor. I'm not a governor. I'm not a president. This is something Nancy Pelosi says that is, the way I like to think about it is the job description's in the title, representative, right? I'm doing the same thing I did when I was 15 and 16 years old, different level, different place. But I'm an advocate on behalf of the people in my home that I live in. And to bring this up because the connection I see between this, the work of your father, the work of all of those in the civil rights era, Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, all, organizers, is that I'm doing the same thing I've done, and I'm a small part in a very long timeline for justice, and I'm honored to be a part of that puzzle.
The power of speaking to people, not at people.
Yep.
Congressman Frost, Patrick, thank you for sharing your love of music, sharing your passion for organizing and impact, sharing the importance of being vulnerable, and sharing both of your remarkable life stories. And for Congressman, for sharing the message that this generation won't be silent. Thank you both for sharing your legacies.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank you.
so very much.
Thank you for joining us. New episodes drop every Tuesday with bonus content every Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment.